This is the final lecture for ECB003 Introduction to Econometrics, which would normally have been delivered on the 5th of May 2020. I'm delivering it in this form because of the current coronavirus crisis. By this stage we have covered all the substantial material of this module, so there are no new topics or new issues to discuss. The purpose of this lecture is basically to give you an idea of what I'm looking for in answers to the final exam paper and what you should expect for the final exam. Of course, this year the final exam will take a very different form from how it normally would take place, and so I will be discussing that as well. Let me start, however, by saying a little bit about the exam resources that are available to you through the Learn portal. Throughout the year we've given you a sample exam paper and outline answers to that sample exam paper, and note that the form of the exam has changed. This has got nothing to do with the current coronavirus crisis. The change in the format of the exam was decided last year, and it's been planned all along. So this sample exam paper and the answers have been available all year, along with the note here that the format of the exam paper has changed. So although you may find it useful to look at some questions on past exam papers, you should not rely on past exam papers as a guide to what will be on the current exam paper. Instead, the reliable guide is to look at the sample paper, which will give you an idea of the format and the type of topics that we'll be asking. If you look at the sample exam paper, you'll see that it's very different from past papers. The exam paper now consists of 8 compulsory questions to be answered in a 2-hour period. Of course, you will get a little bit longer than that because of the process of uploading and downloading materials, but we'll talk about that later. If you download the sample exam paper, I'm assuming that you've downloaded it and that you can check it against the guide here, then you'll see that what I attempt to do is in each question attempts to test particular items of knowledge and particular abilities associated with the topics that have been taught in this module. So for example, question 1 is about the ability to test hypotheses about model parameters. For example, to do t-tests, the ability to test for serial correlation using the Durbin-Watson test, and the understanding of methods for dealing with serial correlation. What do we do if we find its presence? Question 2 asks similar but slightly differentiated topics. It tests the ability to use t-tests for parameter restrictions. So in this case it's for more general restrictions than just the null hypothesis that the coefficient is 0, and it also tests an understanding of f-tests, which is an alternative way of testing for parameter restrictions. Question 3 tests your ability to deal with probability density functions, your understanding of them, and the ability to use the probability density function to calculate the mean of a random variable. Question 4 tests the understanding of joint probability density functions, and in particular the ability to work with jointly normal distributed variables, and to look at the linear relationships between normally distributed random variables, which is particularly important for econometrics. Question 5 tests your understanding of the properties of a least squares regression model and the ability to demonstrate an important property of least squares residuals, in particular that they're uncorrelated with the right hand side variables. Question 6 tests your understanding of the problem of heteroskedasticity and methods for dealing with this problem. Question 7 tests your understanding of simultaneous equations models in econometrics and the ability to apply identification conditions, in particular the order condition for identification. And question 8 tests understanding of dynamic economic models and the ability to distinguish between short run and long run effects. So the purpose of the paper is to test your understanding of a wide range of topics that have been taught in this module and your ability to demonstrate your knowledge and certain important properties of these issues. In addition to the sample exam paper, there are also a series of exercise sheets that I've provided that you can use in order to practice some of the types of questions that will appear on the exam paper. So if you want to do a little bit of practice of the sorts of questions that you might be asked, this is where you should be looking on Learn. The block marked exercise sheets here, we've got marked exercise sheets 1 through to 6. There are answers to each of these exercise sheets, and these should give you just a little bit of practical exercise in attempting these exam questions. But the important thing is not to try to adopt a mechanical process to answering these questions, but to understand the topics and then be able to address the questions that come up. So it's far more important to understand the topic, because if you understand the topic, then the questions are often very, very simple mathematically. They don't require high level mathematics. What they do require is an understanding of the topic that's being addressed and the ability to demonstrate the result that's being asked for. I ought to say a little bit about the change in the rubric for the exam paper, because this leads me on to talking about the mechanics of actually answering the paper and submitting your answers. Of course, everything's changed this year. With the current crisis, we can't do the traditional exam, and instead everything is being done remotely. So on all your exam papers, you're going to see a very different rubric. This is the rubric for econometrics, and it actually has much in common with the rubric you'll see on virtually all your exam papers this year. It will tell you first of all the length of time for the exam. In this case, this was a 2-hour examination. That would have been the amount of time you'd have in the exam hall. But we're now giving you an extra hour for the process of downloading the paper and then uploading your answers at the end. So in total, once you've downloaded the paper, you've then got 3 hours before you need upload your answers. You can use that as you see fit, but the assumption is that you'd be using 2 hours normally to actually answer the questions, leaving you with an hour to deal with the mechanics of downloading the paper and uploading your answers. You need to provide the information on your answers. You need to provide your student number, and you need to provide the module code, in this case ECB003. It's intended to be an anonymous paper, so you shouldn't include your name anywhere in the file or the file name that you upload. But it is important that you include your student number accurately, because we do need to be able to identify your paper. Your paper will be uploaded to a link on Learn. It'll be similar to the links that you've used already for uploading assignments. So it'll be a Turnitin link. Obviously we're not actually going to be using Turnitin on this exercise, but you'll be familiar with the process of uploading answers already. The only difference here is that this will be the answer to the examination. You'll have to create your own file for this rather than the answer to the assignment. Under assessment details, it tells you that this is an open book exam, so there is some advantage to this procedure in that you now have access to whatever materials you wish to use. You can use your lecture notes, printouts of lecture slides, or whatever. It asks you may not, however, copy and paste text content wholesale from the module materials. This isn't relevant for this particular exam, because we're not looking for essay style answers, so this doesn't really apply in your case. Again, it gives you details of text citations. Again, you're not really going to be using citations in the econometrics exam, so this isn't relevant. But in the interests of keeping this comparable to other modules, I've kept all these items of the rubric in the rubric for this module. A key thing here is that the assumption is that your work should be handwritten and the answers scanned or photographed and converted to a PDF document for the purposes of submission. There is the alternative of typing, but in this case I think typing is not really feasible for answering this type of question. These are almost all mathematical style questions which require short proofs using equations and mathematical notation, and it's very difficult to provide accurate typed versions of these. So a much better method in my view is to handwrite the material and then upload it. This of course creates some problems, but we'll discuss those in a moment. Again, there's the standard warning here about academic misconduct and plagiarism, not really relevant in this particular case. Okay, so let me go on to say a little bit about the mechanics of actually providing your answer. What I want to say is what you'll need to have in advance and what you will need to have available to you during the exam. So, what do you need in order to be able to answer this examination? Well, first of all, you need a computer with an internet connection. Obviously, you're going to need to be able to download your paper, and I strongly recommend that the first thing you do is print off the paper. So in addition to a computer with internet connection, I would suggest you have access to, make sure you have access to a printer. It's much easier to work with a printed copy of the exam paper than it is to work with it on screen. You will also need some way of transferring your written answers to a file. So you'll need a camera or possibly a scanner which will allow you to convert handwritten materials into materials that can be pasted into a Word file. So most of you probably have smartphones which you can take photos on, and I strongly suggest that you do a little bit of practice at taking photos of written materials and then transferring it over to your computer, because you will need to be able to do this for your final exam. Okay, so all that you need to make sure in advance that you have these facilities available. Okay, so before you even start the exam, you need to make sure you've got your computer, your printer and your camera or scanner. During the examination itself, then you will need obviously a pen and paper, because you will need to be able to answer your the questions. You'll need to be able to write out your answers. You'll also need a calculator, because some of the questions will require you to do numerical calculations, so you need to have a calculator handy. The calculations here are basically very simple numerical type calculations. It doesn't require a particularly advanced scientific calculator, but I would recommend that you use the calculator that you've been using throughout your studies, and usually we recommend a standard sort of scientific calculator which can, in addition to standard numerical operations, can do things like logarithms and exponential functions. Finally, I think what's important for this is that you also have your book of statistical tables. Okay, the book of statistical tables is we would normally distribute these at the start of the examination, and you need them to be able to look up things like critical values for your test statistics. It is available on a link on Learn. If we go back to the original exam resources here, there is a link to statistical tables for use in the examination. I strongly recommend that you have those printed out and available to you before the exam starts, or before that period of actually answering your exam, because you'll need to be able to access those tables and to look up critical values. Again, as with the exam paper, I think it's important to have a printed copy in front of you, because it's much easier to look up these things in a printed copy than it is to try and deal with them on screen. Okay, so that's a guide as to what you will need in the examination and what you need to prepare yourselves for before the examination takes place. The process of generating your answer file and uploading it has been dealt with in another video that I've prepared. If you go to the videos section on this module, you'll see that I've now added this to my list of videos, which is converting image files to PDF form. The link is on YouTube here if you need to access it, but you should be able to access it through Learn. And that will take you through in detail how you can use photographs of your answers, convert those to image files, and then paste them into a Word document, and finally save that Word document as a PDF. As an experiment, I tried out the process of downloading the sample exam paper, printing it out, and then taking the answers to the sample exam that I've provided, photographing them, pasting them into a Word document and saving it as a PDF. That whole process took me just under 15 minutes. Adding on another couple of minutes perhaps for uploading the materials, you're talking about roughly just over 15 minutes for the whole mechanical process of downloading the paper, printing it out, converting your written answers to a PDF, and then uploading your answers. You've been allowed an hour for this, so it should be considerably more than you need. But you need to practice first. If you try and do this for the first time on the day, you will almost certainly run into problems. So I strongly recommend that you familiarise yourself with this process and practice the mechanical process of taking a handwritten document, converting it to a PDF, so that on the day when you're required to do that, it doesn't create any problems for you. Okay, that is pretty much it for my final lecture. As I said at the start, there is no new material here. This is all material that this is all information about how to approach answering the exam paper. As I say, it's very different from how it's been in previous years, and I'm hoping very strongly this is a one-off and that we will be back to traditional methods next year. Just remains for me to say thank you for your attention. Good luck with the examination. I hope you all do yourselves justice, and if you do have any questions, you must post them to the question and answer forum on Learn. I cannot deal with individual emails. You must post them on the Q&A forum. I will attempt to give as full an answer as I possibly can there. Thank you very much and good luck.